I sometimes caution people to be careful of what you could call an egotistical compassion, or a surface compassion, or an unguided or unwise compassion. They're kind of variations of the same thing. So what do I mean by that? It's kind of, as we become more conscious, it's natural for us to be more open, receptive, and to have the sensitivity to be conscious, to know what's happening in our environment and those around us. So our empathy really comes into play, and we can sense or feel or know or intuit the suffering of another. And that is a wonderful part of our evolution, that we can really care for what is beyond just us, the me, the person. And it shows a kind of ability to widen, and which is, our consciousness is wide. You could say our body sits within our consciousness. Our consciousness is vast, or our physical body is quite small. So we can sense or feel or know the suffering of another if they're having, you could say, a nightmare, a bad time, whatever level, whether mental, physical, a spiritual crisis. And this is, I suppose, very pertinent to those who are empathic or have a kind of call towards being a carer or a body worker, psychiatrist, psychologist, any of the caring kind of fields where you're engaged in helping others. Or you might find the person who, in your circle of friends, who they come to you with their problems because they feel that you're attentive to them and caring. So really you could say this is a kind of part of our growth, but we also have to recognize our own limits, so to speak, and also to ensure that whatever we encounter in terms of the suffering of another, that we don't lose our connection to our own depth, to our own inner being, our connection to spirit. That we have established that to a certain degree, or we can fall back on it or replenish ourselves as needed. So what would be an egotistical compassion? You could say maybe you feel the suffering of another and there's a movement to help. I need to help them. I can help them. But you have to be careful in it that there's not a sense of what quality is that I? Is it a surface or egotistical I? This is, I'm the person and no one else, or a kind of rush into it where you rush in as the person to help and lose your connection to your inner being, to your center, or lose connection to your peace. It's not a bad thing. It's just, there can be a little tinge of the surface person. There's a deeper recognition that help is needed, then the person rushes in to help. And that rush in might be so noisy or busy that you fail to recognize there's a deeper guidance or wisdom that's trying to guide the process, or slow the process, or call a halt to the process, so to speak. And that when there's someone in suffering, there's a natural kind of a feeling or a sense or intuition of what's going on with them. But there also has to be the inner guidance or wisdom to know, I, the person in this moment, the appropriate vehicle or channel for the consciousness to move through. Is this correct? Is the timing correct? And not to force it. Because you can expend a lot of energy, time, and attention when there mightn't be the ripeness for something to change in that person. It mightn't be the appropriate time. It doesn't mean we can't care and be attentive, but we don't lose ourselves in it or feel like we have to take it on. There's an old saying, do not deny someone their suffering, lest you deny them their awakening. That there can be a process where someone is suffering, either a spiritual or emotional crisis, and they might have to get to a certain point in it where they can shake off some outer layers of person or come to a deeper point of surrender or have a realization about their life situation or friends or whatever situation they're in, and to give space for that if needed. At other times, it might be very appropriate to act immediately and to help in some way. But it has to really stem from a deeper guidance, a wisdom, you could call it a soul wisdom, or a higher force that's guiding one. You could call it an intuitive knowing that's beyond the surface mind. And then there's you may encounter different types of suffering and people in that. Some people aren't ready to let go of their suffering. For some, it's a badge of honor, and they like telling the story. Sometimes it's the same story again and again. And sometimes it's a new problem, another new problem, another new problem. And there are those that will literally feed off your attention, so to speak, and continually pull you in, and it's kind of de-energizing and your attention gets usurped, so to speak, and one has to be very careful with this. Say, is this appropriate use of my energy, attention in this time? It's not that we don't want to give, but is it being received correctly? And it's not that there isn't a depth of spiritual energy and help available, but one has to make sure one is connected to it and replenished by it to do any kind of caring, healing work. So as one becomes more conscious, there's a natural joy in coming out of one's own suffering, and there's a kind of jubilance in that to help others come out of their suffering in whatever way is appropriate. But there can be still elements of our egoic personality or surface personality that will, you could say, co-opt it into a new, you could say, identity as the healer or carer or spiritual guide. And then that creates another resistance in our being to a deeper progression, because we're always evolving. And it's important not to sell ourselves short, so to speak. And as you become more conscious, others may see that light in you, and that's natural. They want to move towards it. Some they want to emulate it or be like that or learn from it. Others want to gobble it. And some are actually a disposition to try blow it out, so to speak. That they're moved by more mesoric or hostile influences and they want to push your buttons or to distract you in some way or enmesh you in some way. But that can be also useful as it can show you where you're still prone or open to egoic drama. So there has to be a balance between compassion, this empathy to help, and the recognition of suffering in others and in the world, and also a wisdom or guidance from within or above that can replenish and energize you and direct you. And to be very conscious of timing. And also, if there's a sincerity, you can sense a sincerity in the other person, that there's kind of an alignment in their being of it's a possibility of an opening, a ripeness, and you say, here's an opportunity. And that opportunity, it may not bear fruit straight away, but it can be simple that you plant the seed in that moment and it comes to fruition later. And that's a really powerful and beautiful thing to experience. And it's very potent. And you can begin to recognize it as you become more conscious. There's these moments of really potent possibilities. And if you're in tune and there's an inkling of an opening in the other, it's like the light can penetrate and you become a vehicle for, or an assistant in a conscious opening and a transformation. And that is staggeringly beautiful. And those who are engaged in that know it and they really witness it. And there's a recognition that it's not really you, it's the divine working its own transformation, moments of potent power or a stillness that can penetrate the densest identity and story, where the other can get a glimpse of themselves as you become a kind of mirror or an opening into infinity. And then anything becomes possible in that moment. And the more open, transparent, conscious, connected, and surrendered one is, then the more one can be of service, so to speak. So, in this evolution of consciousness, as we become more conscious, there's a greater capacity to serve and a greater joy in the service and an effortlessness. And you're not diminished in any way. And you know who you're working for, that any work done, any offering made is to the divine, for the divine, and from the divine. And maybe you could say that's a a guided or a wise compassion. And sometimes it's appropriate to step away from any situation that's not appropriate for you to deal with there and then. And not to have any kind of egoic notions of responsibility. Just because you recognize a suffering doesn't mean you rush in. It's very, especially when you start to become conscious, it's very easy to be pulled in and lose your connection, so to speak. And it's like slipping down the ladder, so to speak. So self-care in terms of keeping connected to your own essence, your own soul, or opening directly to be able to feel, sense, or to be able to call the descending and ascending energy, the Mother Shakti, and to ask for her blessing. And it's a funny one, really. You can be sitting with someone and recognize their suffering, yet underneath, you know everything is okay, and more than okay. Everything is taken care of. Thank you.